My garage is approximately 18 by 20 feet with 10-foot high ceilings and has a wooden garage door from the 70s that is actively growing mushrooms. It also has many holes in the ceiling and walls for air leaks to occur. As a result of this, climate controlling my shop has been off the table, and therefore my dust collection system has always vented outside to maximize its efficiency. Because of an insanely overpriced housing market in my area, I've decided that now is the time to upgrade my shop to a fully insulated and climate controlled area, as we plan on living in this house for some years to come. So without further delay, let's get on with the project. I begin by moving my tools away from the walls and taking down my dust collection piping. As you all know, my system is glued together and means to remove the pipes a sawzall is required in a couple of spots. This is nothing a few couplers during the rebuild won't solve. The pipe that vents the exhaust from the dust collector outside is removed, and all my long-term temporary shop lighting is taken down. Now the fun begins with help from my buddy and a dumpster in the driveway. As we tore down the ceiling, we found this little gem, a stack of boards. Not quite sure what it's for, but if you have any guesses, leave them down below in the comments. And here's what we're left with at the end of day one. People say trucks are awesome for moving stuff, but I challenge any truck owner to fit more than I fit in my van. I bought R22 Rockwell insulation to replace the deflated pink fiberglass that's currently in the walls. As a result, this meant me adding 2x2 strapping to the 2x4 wall studs in order to fit the thicker insulation behind the drywall. Off camera, my dad and I took out the door and window as their R value is probably 0, and I've never used the door or window since moving in 9 years ago. We built a 2x6 wall sheathed with 1/2-inch plywood on the outside and added 2x2 strapping on the inside to make the wall completely flush inside. The reason for 2x6 studs in these two areas is to move the new vinyl siding further out to be closer with the edge of the bricks and keep the water off the sills. My garage is built with 2x8 ceiling joists that are placed 4 foot on center. This led me to the decision to use 2x4 strapping placed 2 foot on center perpendicular to the ceiling joist. The grid that this creates is perfect for mounting my new shop lights as well as hanging drywall. I then opened 2 bags of insulation and installed them in the easiest locations just to free up some more floor space in the garage to work. Next, I mounted all 20 octagon boxes in the ceiling in a 4x5 grid and ran the electrical between them. Yes, I did say 20 lights, as I believe this to be truly the cheapest and best way to light my shop for filming. Because I'm using standard octagon boxes and light bulb holders, this setup is future-proof for when lighting technology eventually changes. My dumpster was leaving the next morning, so I decided to save $70 from the garage door installer to come in the next week by removing it myself. This left me with my homemade plywood garage door being taken down and put back up at the end of each workday for the next few days. Good thing it wasn't calling for rain in the next little bit. Well, honestly, it didn't leak as much as I thought. Off camera, my dad and I installed the R22 Rockwell insulation in the walls and began installing the vapor barrier. When installing each electrical box and octagon, I made sure to use the pre-molded vapor barrier pieces behind them. These were tied into the vapor barrier with the use of tuck tape. I then created the new attic hatch hole and reinforced the top sides of it for climbing on in the future. Off camera, I got a few buddies to help me put up the ceiling drywall, which was only possible with the use of my other buddy's borrowed drywall lifter. That thing was a godsend, as I don't see this being possible with the 10-foot ceilings putting up 12-foot sheets of drywall. I then pre-painted around each octagon so I could get my lights installed, as I was quite sick of running temporary lighting at this point. We then put up the rest of the drywall other than above the garage door, as it will have to be custom cut after the new garage door is installed. If you're thinking, man, that guy went way overkill with the drywall screws, you're correct. The reason for this is the Rockwell insulation is actually designed for 2x6 studs, which are 1/2 inch wider than my studs, which are 2x4s attached to 2x2s. This resulted in the insulation pushing out on the drywall slightly and popping drywall screws out. This meant I had to push the drywall against the studs while driving in more screws than normal to hold it in place. I only put 2 coats of mud on everything instead of 3, as this after all is only a garage. I then lightly sanded everything and began applying drywall primer. 1 coat took my entire 2.5-gallon bucket of primer. I then put a heavy coat of sealing paint on everything. Finally, it was time to move my tools back into place and out of my way. Here's the state of the shop before the dust collection gets put back into place. I began by installing the motor and impeller back onto the wall, which is a very precarious operation to do solo. I then attach the two brackets that hold my cyclone in place. Once in place, I slide the center pipe up and secure it with a screw from the front. To install the main trunk of the piping on the wall, I set up some spacers to hold one end up and the other attached to the cyclone. This allows me to reinstall my 3 supports on the wall by driving in 3-inch screws. The centerpiece needed slight modification as the window in that area is now gone. I then take the pipework down so I can drive in the other 3-inch screws. The pipes are then reinstalled and smacked into place. I apply a generous amount of silicone around the entrance to the cyclone and slide the pipe into its final resting position. I wipe off the extra and also apply silicone all over the other areas where air leaks might occur. Off camera, I attach the branch heading over to the miter saw station. To reinstall the branch going to the CNC, I had to add a bolt to support the center of the pipe off the garage door supports, and a ladder with a Kleenex box as a spacer. Some zip ties hold it in place while I reconnect the joint at the blast gate. The end gets a metal strap driven into the wood strapping. Here's an overview of the shop thus far. I then add some PVC cement and a coupler to reinstall the drop pipe to my table saw. I took this reconstruction time to redo the wiring along the pipes. This is tape-on speaker wire that my dad bought like 20 years ago and never used. It worked great for this and was very easy to solder at the drops. Each joint was then coated in hot glue to protect the exposed wires. It was then time to address my tool wall, which you can tell was always kind of an afterthought. I took everything off as well as the plywood backer as I'm going to be installing a full 4x8 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood as my new tool wall. This meant the clamp racks needed to be moved over slightly. I would recommend taking all the clamps off before attempting to move the rack as this didn't go great for me. I then notched out an area with my jigsaw to clear the wall receptacle at the bottom of the tool wall. My wife then helped me attach the sheet of plywood with several 3-inch screws. I then found the center of the plywood to mount my logo. Next I could mount the second most important thing in the shop, Finkel's lava dredger of course. From here it was a process to figure out where each tool should go, but fun to practice my Tetris skills. To heat and cool the shop, I decided that my garage is now so well sealed and insulated, I can treat it like an extension of the house and use an existing air duct to punch through the wall. I started in my basement drilling a 5-inch hole in the drywall, then using a very long 3/8 inch masonry bit, drilled a hole in the center into the garage. I used the hole saw to align the centers and trace the outline of the hole. Because I didn't want to rent a drill and hole saw, I opted to drill several small holes around the circle and hammer out the inside. I then ran a 5-inch duct pipe through the wall and in the garage mounted a soffit vent with a spring-loaded one-way check valve. This means when the furnace is off, the duct is closed and dust cannot get in. The elbows were added inside the house to connect my existing ducting, and everything was foil taped to seal any leaks. It was around this time I decided my assembly table had seen better days and needed some new life. It was as simple as taking the screws out and plopping a new piece of 5/8 inch melamine on top. I then began working on the exhaust side of my dust collector by making a rectangular adapter with the matching inside dimensions of the exhaust. I push a small piece of 6-inch metal duct pipe and screw it into place. This adapter was mounted to the existing 6 holes at the exhaust. I made sure to use the rubber gasket and fill all gaps with caulk after. Next, I took my new canister filter and laid it on some 2x6 boards, then traced out the perimeter shape. Then over at the bandsaw, I could follow my line and once cut out, smooth the edges out with my spindle sander. The way I chose to mount these boards to the filter was to drive in screws into the thick rubber base of the filter. A clamp helps me get the first screw in, but the metal piece that runs across the inside bottom of the filter was getting in my way, so I had to remove it temporarily. I used 3-inch screws in 4 different locations on each board. I then reinstalled the metal bar on the bottom of the filter and made sure the sweeper mechanism still worked. I then marked the location for a 90-degree 6-inch vent hood to go through the top of the filter. I then drilled 2 pilot holes in the corners to make room for my metal cutting jigsaw blade. This worked great, but couldn't finish the job, so my angle grinder was used to only partially cut through to avoid lighting my new filter on fire. After a quick hit with the file to take off the burrs, I test the fit and it's good. I then cut the 4 corners about an inch up. These cuts allow me to make bends on the edges from the inside out. This combined with the caulking does a great job holding everything in place. In doing this, I had to cut half my handle off, and this only allows 180 degrees of rotation. This is okay because there are 2 sweepers inside, so they will still get 100% coverage. Next I cut a piece of 24-inch by 19-inch 3/4-inch plywood in half diagonally to create 2 braces. These both get several pocket holes along their short edge. I then took another piece of 3/4-inch plywood and glued and screwed it along the edge of my 2 brackets with 2-inch screws. The brad nails are just there so things don't move around on me. After my test fit, I realized the ducts were interfering with the bracket, so I used my jigsaw to cut 2 small notches out of the bottom. The bracket was attached to the 2 wall studs with 6 3-inch screws. I then took the filter assembly, slid it into place, and secured it with those pocket holes I drilled earlier. Next, I could wrestle with trying to get the plastic bag on the bottom. This is a standard plastic bag that came with my Harbor Freight dust collector several years ago, and I never used till now. I simply cut the bag to a shorter length, as most of the dust will end up in the cyclone bin. The last thing to do was install the 2 6-inch elbows and straight pipe connecting the filter to the dust collector exhaust, and of course everything was foil taped and caulked to seal in the air. Now back to the outside of my garage, where I've removed the old non-vented soffit and purchased new vented soffit. These pieces come in 12-foot lengths, so I set up a simple cross-cut guide on my assembly table to make repeated straight and efficient cuts. The way I was told to do this was get an old steel circular saw blade and install it backwards, so the back of the tooth does the cutting. This worked great, but was loud as hell. I did install rafter baffles all the way from the soffit to halfway up the attic rafters. These baffles will ensure I don't get any blown-in insulation covering my new vented soffit, as this type of roof needs to breathe. Speaking of blown-in insulation, I ended up with 15 bags of the stuff to insulate my attic. You can see the house part of the attic has R20 bats that really are probably R12 at this point, and the garage has nothing. Blowing the insulation was really not that difficult at all. My wife helped me on the ground and said it was pretty easy peasy. It only took the length of Sonic the Hedgehog the movie to complete the install. I know this because we occupied the kids with that movie, and as I came down from the attic, my son said, "Movie's done!" There's about 18 to 20 inches in the entire attic now, and should be very warm in the winters. The last thing to do in the shop was to take a piece of melamine for the attic hatch cover and attach bats of R22 Rockwool insulation on the back side of it. And with that, the reno is complete, and I can finally start making some sawdust again.
It's good.